the Three Heroes of Chernobyl, who saved millions and prevented half of Europe from becoming uninhabitable. In April 1986, the world came terrifyingly close to a catastrophe greater than any nuclear weapon ever built. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, a single explosion shattered the night, and for a few haunting days, the fate of half of Europe hung by a thread. But when everyone else ran from the invisible poison spreading through the air, three men chose to walk toward it. Armed with courage and little else, they volunteered to dive into a flooded radioactive basement beneath the ruined reactor. Their mission was impossible: to drain the water before the molten nuclear core above could ignite a second, far deadlier explosion. Had they failed, the blast would have wiped out cities, poisoned rivers, and rendered entire nations uninhabitable for centuries. Instead, because of them, millions survived. Because of them, half of Europe was saved. The untold tale of the three men who walked into darkness so that the rest of the world could live in light. April 26, 1986. A routine safety test was underway at Chernobyl's reactor number 4. The operators, following orders from their superiors, were attempting to simulate a power outage to see if the plant's turbines could generate enough electricity to keep cooling systems running. But a chain of errors, miscommunications, and design flaws turned the experiment into disaster. Within seconds, power levels surged out of control. At 1:23 a.m., a massive explosion ripped through the building, tearing the reactor apart and hurling a glowing column of fire into the night sky. Chunks of radioactive graphite rained down on the site like burning stones. Inside the control room, confusion and horror erupted. No one truly understood what had happened. Some thought it was just a fire, but the reality was far worse. The reactor's core had exploded, releasing radiation levels thousands of times greater than Hiroshima. Firefighters arrived minutes later, bravely climbing onto the roof, unaware that the glittering dust falling around them was lethal. Many of them would never leave Chernobyl alive. And while the fires blazed above, something even more dangerous was happening below. Beneath the shattered reactor, water from burst pipes began to flood the basement, and no one yet realized that this rising water could soon turn a disaster into a global extinction event. In the days that followed the explosion, the Soviet authorities scrambled to contain the chaos. Helicopters dropped sand, lead, and boron onto the burning reactor in a desperate attempt to smother the radioactive fire. Thousands of workers, later called liquidators, were brought in to clean the site, most of them unaware of the deadly radiation surrounding them. But while all eyes were focused on the smoking ruins above ground, a far more terrifying danger was forming below. Scientists soon realized that the melted nuclear fuel, a blazing mixture of uranium, graphite, and metal, was burning its way downward through the concrete, and beneath it lay a massive pool of water from the ruptured safety pipes and fire hoses. If that molten core made contact with the water, the result would be unthinkable. A steam explosion powerful enough to destroy the remaining reactors, releasing unimaginable levels of radiation into the air. It wouldn't just affect Ukraine. It wouldn't just affect the Soviet Union. It would poison the air and soil across half of Europe, from Poland to Germany, from Belarus to France. Entire nations could have become uninhabitable for centuries. The scientists calculated that the explosion's force could reach 3 to 5 megatons, the equivalent of a small nuclear bomb. The fallout would contaminate rivers that flowed across borders, destroy farmland, and force millions to flee their homes. Time was running out. Every minute the molten core, later known as the elephant's foot, crept closer to the flooded basement. There was only one way to stop it. Someone had to go down there, into the radioactive water, and open the valves manually to drain it. It was a death sentence. But without it, Europe would die too. The situation at Chernobyl had become desperate. The scientists knew what needed to be done, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Someone had to enter the flooded basement beneath Reactor 4, where radiation levels were so high that a few minutes of exposure could mean death within days. The room fell silent as the realization sank in. Then, from among the workers, 3 men stepped forward. Their names were Alexei Yanonenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. Alexei and Valery were engineers who knew the plant's layout better than anyone. They had helped design the very systems they were now being asked to shut down. Boris, their shift supervisor, volunteered to accompany them. Not because he had to, but because he refused to let them go alone. They knew what this mission meant. They had families, friends, and futures waiting for them. But they also knew what would happen if they did nothing. When a superior asked if they understood the risk, Alexei answered quietly, "Of course we do. But if we don't do it, no one will." There was no hesitation, no debate. Just 3 men preparing to walk into a nightmare. They were given rubber wetsuits, flashlights, and breathing equipment, almost useless against the radiation waiting below. The Geiger counters were already screaming before they even reached the basement entrance. The others watched in silence as the 3 heroes descended the metal stairs, disappearing into the darkness. They didn't know if they'd ever see them again. What these men were about to do would save millions of lives, and yet, almost no one outside that plant would ever know their names. The metal door creaked open, and a wave of cold, stagnant air rolled out. The 3 men switched on their flashlights, narrow beams slicing through the blackness. Ahead of them lay the flooded tunnels beneath Reactor 4, filled with radioactive water that shimmered faintly under the light. Each step sent ripples echoing through the silence. The water rose past their knees, then their waists, freezing, murky, and deadly. Their Geiger counters clicked furiously, faster and faster, until the sound became a constant shriek. But they pressed on. They moved slowly, guided only by their memory of the plant's layout. The air was thick, humid, and metallic, filled with the invisible poison of radiation. Their flashlights began to dim, their batteries draining in the cold and damp. Then, suddenly, darkness. The lights went out. In the pitch black, the only sound was the sloshing of water and the muffled breathing through their masks. For a moment, panic threatened to take hold, but Alexei, who knew the route by heart, kept calm. He felt along the walls, counting pipes with his hands, whispering directions to the others. Minutes felt like hours. Their bodies trembled, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion and fear. And then, a faint metallic clang. Their hands brushed against something familiar. The valves. They had found them. With trembling hands, Alexei and Valery gripped the handles and began to turn. It was stiff, rusted and swollen from the water. They used all their strength, twisting again and again until finally, a deep rumble filled the tunnel. The water began to drain. They had done it. The impossible mission was complete. When the men finally climbed back to the surface, Their faces were pale and soaked. The onlookers held their breath. The scientists checked their meters. The water was falling. The second explosion had been prevented. There were no speeches or applause, just silent relief, and three men standing in the cold dawn light, having just saved half of Europe from destruction. They were heroes, though none of them called themselves that. For years, the true story of those three men was hidden, buried beneath Soviet secrecy and silence. The government spoke little of their mission, and the world moved on, never realizing how close it had come to destruction. Rumors spread that all three divers had died within days, victims of radiation poisoning. People called them martyrs, the men who gave their lives so others could live. But decades later, the truth finally surfaced. Alexei Ananenko and Valery Bespalov, the two engineers who opened the valves, both survived. Only their supervisor, Boris Baranov, passed away years later in 2005 from a heart attack unrelated to the mission. They had faced what no one else dared to face, and they lived to see the world they saved. Still, recognition came slowly. No parades, no monuments, no fame. Just quiet acknowledgement and gratitude from those who finally learned what they had done. In 2018, long after the disaster, the Ukrainian government honored them as Heroes of Ukraine, the nation's highest title of bravery. It was a small gesture for an immeasurable act of courage. Think about it. Three ordinary men, armed with little more than flashlights and courage, stopped a chain reaction that could have poisoned rivers, darkened skies, and made half of Europe uninhabitable for centuries. Their names may not be known to every household, but their sacrifice echoes through history. They remind us that true heroism isn't born from power, wealth, or fame, but from duty, courage, and the willingness to do what must be done, even when no one is watching. So the next time you hear the word Chernobyl, remember, it wasn't only a story of disaster. It was a story of humanity, of three men who stepped into darkness so the rest of the world could live in light. This was the story of the three forgotten heroes of Chernobyl. They didn't wear capes. They didn't seek glory. They simply did what needed to be done, and in doing so, saved millions of lives. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, please give this video a like and subscribe to Untold Tales. Your support helps us keep sharing the hidden moments, the unsung heroes, and the powerful truths that shaped our world. Thank you for watching.